My friends, the Russian army is launching a major offensive all along the Donetsk front, more specifically against Krasnohorivka, where Russian assault detachments are progressing block by block. Surely Steinchenko's counterattack will knock the Russians out of the city. Seriously, if the city falls, the Russian army could push the front line 10 kilometers to the west. Here from a French newspaper, Le Figaro. Krasnohorivka, the Russians are still advancing in eastern Ukraine. Usually in such situations, we always get a huge pile of cope. But even the journalists are now, yeah, GG well played.
We are winning!
Long story short, at this point, the Russians control the entire southern part of Krasnohorivka. And this was confirmed on the 17th of April by German journalist Julian Röpke, with his own mapping of the battle. On top of that, the city is very hard to supply, with really only one road available to Ukrainian forces to bring reinforcements and ammunition. At this rate, it's really only a matter of time before the city falls into enemy hands. Especially this time with the absence of the Azov detachments. So be ready for a deep tactical analysis of the battle. How did this entire Krasnohorivka mess even start? Well, after washing machines, after the mighty shovels, the Russians have used a new cheat code. Are you ready? Turtle tanks. That's right, they're now attacking Ukrainian positions with T-72s wrapped up in huge cages. More on that in a minute. And by the way, you're not the only ones interested in knowing what's actually happening on the front lines.
Мне нравится, знаешь, что карта интерактивная. Мы хотели сказать большое спасибо хохлам за то, что они носят желтые повязки.
Да, их очень видно.
Да, их очень видно. Я стрижи, красавчик. Видишь, у него какая карта интерактивная? То есть он показывает удар и тут же на карте отмечает, где он был. Вот, видишь? Камертон, кстати. Это те, что перешли в Игнорак этим. Кахматов. Помахали все туда, мы же его смотрим. Братан, канал Legend History. Привет. Hi.
Welcome to History Legends, and here are the latest news of the Russo-Ukrainian war. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. As you know, some of my Ukraine videos have been targeted with limited or no ads. So make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal to keep the show running. Thank you to everyone that has already helped. And welcome to the headquarters. Do you remember how in late February we already talked about a Russian assault on Krasnohorivka? A pretty spectacular attack across open field, if I can be honest. According to pro-Ukrainian sources, the Russians have been expelled from Krasnohorivka. According to pro-Russian sources, they have reached all the way up to this street. Time will tell. Well, turns out the Ukrainian report was correct. The Russian assault squads were in fact repulsed by the Ukrainian counterattack. However, 1 month later, with the departure of the Azov Brigade, Krasnohorivka returned into the crosshairs of the Russian command. This time the idea was spending more time finding and suppressing Ukrainian strongholds all over the city before launching the attack. For example, on the 26th of March, the Russians detected this Ukrainian anti-tank guided missile system on the last floor of this apartment block, which was then destroyed by an FPV drone. And in terms of artillery, the Russians applied the vodka principle, never in moderation. This is when Putin's orchestra started the symphony, with helicopter strikes, the daily artillery bombardments, and FAB 1500 bombs smashing entire compounds. Now the Russian 5th Motorized Rifle Brigade in charge of the Krasnohorivka sector was slowly starting to shape the battlefield. Here you can see drones of the 3rd Battalion, 80th Air Assault Brigade harassing a Russian infantry unit during a rotation in the vicinity of the Trudovskaya mine. This happened right here on the map, so we can assume the Ukrainians noticed a concentration of enemy forces in the sector. Keep in mind that there were 4 sectors of utmost importance for the successful defense of Krasnohorivka. We start with Sector Tatiana, which secures the logistics line in and out of the city. Problem for the Russians is that an attack from the north is not suitable for mechanized assault due to the open terrain and the need to cross over the Lozova River. Then we have combat position Hana for the large industrial area in the middle of Krasnohorivka, followed by Sector Irina for the easternmost set of houses, and lastly Chelsea for this residential sector on the southern outskirts of the city. As you can see behind me, on April 1st, drone operators of the Ukrainian 109th Territorial Defense Brigade damaged an IFV right next to some trench network. This drone strike was geolocated right along this tree line, only a couple hundred meters away from Krasnohorivka. Once again, this could confirm that the Russians were indeed bringing in massive reinforcements. Lastly, on the 6th of April, we see this video of Russian artillery shelling Ukrainian infantrymen entrenched in the southern part of Krasnohorivka. Everything pointed towards a renewed Russian assault right here at the exact same spot where they attacked a month earlier. When in doubt, double tap. And surprise, surprise, this is exactly what happened on the 8th of April. At once, Russian artillery batteries pounded Chelsea like no tomorrow and unleashed a storm of steel on any Ukrainian strongholds and armored vehicles deployed on the outer perimeter of Krasnohorivka. The goal was to pin down enemy forces while the first wave drove into battle. At first, we see a column of 6 Russian armored vehicles rush forward at full speed. This means they left the cover of this forest and urban agglomeration, and this is the location they were detected by the Ukrainians. Right at the spot where this tree line stands, the Russian column separated in 2 groups of 3. One unit advanced between this tree line and the railway line up until this dacha area, where they then fired at these buildings right here, whereas the second unit pushed diagonally across the open field. That's when the Ukrainian drone operators spotted an additional 6 Russian armored vehicles driving at full speed. So at this point we have 3 Russian BMPs right here and 9 on the other side of the railway line. Here's the same itinerary of the attack, but from a north-south perspective of the battlefield. As you can see, the BMPs eventually disembarked their infantry component, and we can confirm at least 3 of these BMPs having been destroyed during the initial assault. This is when the Russians unleashed their secret weapon. Yet another column of 4 armored vehicles appeared on the horizon. Bled Boltan, is it vodka or I see big ninja turtle incoming? The Russians nicknamed this war machine Tsar Mangal, literally the Tsar's barbecue grill. In fact, it was a T-72 tank with a huge box, some sort of cage, protecting the top and the sides. This design was specifically made to counter FPV drone strikes. This is what happens when you let DPR coal miners with too much time on their hands. This reinforcement column also appeared from there, but then immediately branched off diagonally. The column pushed ahead and bypassed the Trudovskaya mine. Here we can see the Tsar tank providing direct fire support for the rest of the column. Quickly after, they reached the first houses of Krasnohorivka. As you can see at this point, Ukrainian artillery fire intensified. Boom! Direct hit on the Tsar tank. Normal! We can also see how cluster munition was used to prevent the enemy from disembarking the troops. But it was too late. By the time the Ukrainian artillery responded to the attack, Russian infantry had already left the IFVs and ran towards the ruins for cover. As you can see on this map, this assault allowed the Russian armed forces to regain a foothold inside Krasnohorivka, with dozens of riflemen pushing across the residential sector. Although less spectacular over the course of the day, a continuous streams of BMPs, either individually or in small batches of 2, came in and out of the battlefield to disembark their infantry component. Since we don't have the entire video of the attack, it's very hard to estimate actually how many Russians managed to infiltrate Ukrainian positions. These latest Russian gains were confirmed the next day by the following drone footage of this Ukrainian artillery fire on this IFV and on this multi-level building, geolocated right here on the map. By the way, the Ukrainians were so salty at the Tsar tank that they followed it and grilled its entire hiding spot. One troubling observation is the lack of any sort of detonation from minefields to halt Russian armored columns. It's as if the Russian attack columns knew exactly where to bypass the minefields. And this is something I noticed all across the front, and a situation that should worry the Ukrainian command and that should thoroughly be analyzed. After the initial assault, heavy street-to-street fighting followed, especially in that dacha area that was sort of left behind during the assault. The Ukrainian command in Krasnohorivka understood that they had to counterattack immediately, but with what reserves? Here you can see two Ukrainian Humvees from the 109th Territorial Defense Brigade advancing as they used their 50 cal machine guns for suppressive fire. Each vehicle disembarked a fire team of about 5 men, tasked with clearing the buildings in front of them. Once this was accomplished, all the soldiers ran to the vehicles and they all withdrew from the contact line. The Ukrainians also tried to stem the flow of enemy reinforcements pouring in, like these drone-dropping grenades that ambushed this Russian fire team right as they exited from the BMP. As for the Russians to provide fire support for assault squads, they fired their 2S4 Tulpan 240mm self-propelled heavy mortars, destroying one enemy position after another. In the days following the attack, positional combat continued. However, it became imperative for the Russian command to secure the dacha area in order to prevent the breachhead they captured from being encircled by enemy troops. Here from the 14th of April, you can see Russian infantry squads come and clear the houses one by one. And the only thing the Ukrainians could do was to harass them with FPV drones or through very precise artillery shelling. Problem is, this last set of strikes were geolocated 600 meters ahead of the initial landing zone, right across from the railway station. This means by the 15th of April, Russian forces possibly controlled all this area of Krasnohorivka. On a side note, let's not forget the people actually fighting there. I stumbled on a post with names of Ukrainian soldiers that fell for the defense of Krasnohorivka. Here, 34-year-old Yevhen Dmitrenko from Lubensk fell in Krasnohorivka on the 15th of April. 37-year-old Mykola Isayev from Lipovets fell on the 10th of April. 29-year-old Volodymyr Sachenok from Richiv KIA on the 8th of April. Thoughts and prayers for their family and friends. What made Ukrainian counterattacks difficult, just like in Chasiv Yar, was Russian aviation. On April 15th alone, 6 Russian attack helicopters fired a total of 240 unguided rockets at the enemy. This clearly shows the impact of Ukraine's lack of air defense capabilities. And if they don't find a solution pretty quick, it's just gonna get worse from there. On April 16th, the situation on the front line became a bit clearer. It was actually this grouping on the northern side of the railway line that managed to reach the train station. Meanwhile, we can assume this sector here remained in the gray zone. Behind me, you can see what this residential sector actually looks like from a bird's eye perspective, with this strategic railway line separating this district from the rest of the city. By the way, all this time, according to the mapping of pro-Ukrainian deep state UA, the Russians had not even set foot inside Krasnohorivka. What type of scam is this? Ukrainian reinforcements did seem to have arrived, but it was too little too late. Unfortunately for this Ukrainian fire team, they stood no chance as they were spotted by an FPV drone using thermal imagery. This is when the commanders of the 5th Brigade decided to launch Phase 2 of their offensive. Here, from the perspective of a Ukrainian drone, you see 7 Russian armored vehicles separated in 2 columns, one of 3 and one of 4, the second one being led by a tank. Just like during the previous assaults, they drove by the Trudovskaya mine and then branched off across this field, but this time they didn't stop at the first houses. One column did land its infantry, but another continued another 500 meters under enemy fire up until the area of the train station, and it's only then that all the riflemen exited the vehicles. To avoid being trapped and detected by enemy drones, this Russian tank simply rammed right into the perimeter wall in order to open a new path. And in the end, if the Pervomaivka district was marked as being in a gray zone up until now, at this point we cannot deny that it was occupied by Russian troops. During this latest push, Russian detachments cleared the eastern side of March 8th, Shkolnaya and Shevchenko streets, whereas fighting continued on the western half. Here, Russian drone operators of the 238th Artillery Brigade searched and destroyed this T-72M1 right at this location on the map. The Russians were getting lucky with Chelsea, and at this point it seemed the Ukrainians were losing control of the entire southern part of the town. Even worse for Ukraine! No attack on Krasnohorivka is complete without the intervention of a Tsar tank. What's crazy is that this medieval battering ram literally drove over 1,000 meters on its own up until what the Russians call the refractory plant. And then it came back. Russian telegrams said that at first the Ukrainians mocked this beast of a tank because of its look and because it was totally ineffective for tank duels. But they stopped giggling when they saw the Tsar tank clearing minefields, bringing in infantry, jamming drones with its electronic warfare assets, and simply destroying FPV after FPV in droves. Not only that, but regular Russian tanks are now tuned and upgraded with cages and camouflage nests, like this T-72B3 tank you can see on screen. The next day, on the 17th, assault detachments started making some progress along Lermontov Street and Zherezhnodorozhnaya Street, as well as on the other side of the railway line along Ulitsa Vatutina, a street named after the famous Soviet general Nikolai Vatutin. Once again, some Ukrainian reinforcements were stopped by Russian artillery fire. At the same time, the Russian command now faced a new problem. The Ukrainian defense of Krasnohorivka was solidified in the central district due to high-rise buildings like these ones, and especially this massive industrial area. So assault squads of the 5th Brigade will have no other choice but to carry on attacks from the south, essentially frontal attacks. But they can also try to expand their area of control from the east. Now, how does the Battle of Krasnohorivka play into the big scheme of things? Well, here is Krasnohorivka in the middle of what we call the Donetsk front. The battle around Avdiivka is also part of this front, but it is located 25 kilometers to the northeast. Overall, from an operational perspective, we can expect the Russian command's objective to be the Vovcha River, which they hope to reach in 3 axes: Pervomaivske, Krasnohorivka, and Heorivka. So let's start north of Krasnohorivka in Pervomaivske. According to the latest reports, the 9th Brigade of the DPR claims to have fully secured the settlement. Is it true? Is it not true? Let's have a look. On the 6th of April, Russian riflemen were getting harassed in this part of the settlement by swarms of FPV drones. Now, the next day, on the 7th of April, Ukrainian drone operators detected enemy BMPs disembarking infantry, which were quickly bombarded by very precise artillery fire. And of course, this is the only thing that was shared on social media to show that Ukraine was still winning. Thing is, this artillery strike was geolocated 1,500 meters ahead of the contact line. And this latest push forced the last pockets of Ukrainian troops to abandon the buildings standing next to the front. The Russian capture of Pervomaivske was confirmed on April 9th, with the following Russian flag raising geolocated right here on the map, at the western end of the settlement. Now keep in mind that it took over 5 months, maybe more, for the Russian army to capture this stronghold. Now the Russian plan could be to straighten the front line by eliminating the Ukrainian troops in this pocket. After that, the plan could be to storm Netailove, and then bring the battle to Karlivka and the Vovcha River. At this rate, we'll talk about this battle by the end of the year. Now, if we go south of Krasnohorivka in Heorivka, we mostly face positional fighting, with Russian assault squads trying to grind their way forward. But overall, the Ukrainians still hold the line. Here from the 20th of March, we see Ukrainian FPV drone strikes on a Russian mechanized unit geolocated right here. This means it was attacked 400 meters in front of the contact line. And then we have this video from the 25th of Russian mortars bombarding various Ukrainian trench networks in the same sector. So we have every reason to believe the next Russian objective would be to clear this sector. And if they succeed in this mission, they will only need to conquer another 2.3 kilometers of Horivka. To me, it seems clear that in both Pervomaiske and Horivka, that the Russians didn't deploy many troops for the complete capture of these settlements. Hence the very slow rate of advance. So in a way, if these are only secondary axes of attack, one can wonder where will the main attack come from. I also wanted to tell you about the situation in Avdiivka, but it's pretty important, so I will keep it for another video. That's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of my analysis. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to support my work, make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal. The links are in the description below.